Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 greatest album closing songs of all time. Before we get going, a big apology. I know I've been away a lot recently. I've been working on all kinds of projects, releasing all sorts of records, and I also had that chesty thing that a lot of people got over Christmas, which knocked me out for a couple of weeks. I hope it's not too late to wish you a Happy New Year. Probably is. I'll do it anyway. And I hope to be back in this year with lots and lots of new videos for you. But let's get into it. So look, closing songs on albums, they are crucial, aren't they? Because they're so important to creating your memory and feeling towards an album. It's very much the aftertaste of what you've had and what you've listened to. In many ways, I guess, more important than the opening song, because the closing song can leave you elated, it can leave you devastated, really depending on what ingredients the album has delivered to you up to that point. There are, of course, hundreds and hundreds of great closing songs. Some form part of some of the climax to a long journey, musical journey. Others are just great full stops on a collection of songs. But I've gone for 10 here that I think have always had an impact on me and probably still do, I think. But let's get into it. Number 10, I'm going to put American Girl from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' 1975 debut album. This is a good example of just a great full stop on a record. The album wasn't a huge hit when it came out, and it was actually bigger in the UK, where the band had had to come and sort of align themselves with the punk movement to get any kind of commercial traction. But after the album had been out for a while, this was eventually released as a single in the States, and it very soon became Tom Petty's show closer, and it remained for 40 years something of his anthem, really. The whole album is a cracking record. It's a real statement about how rock and roll is alive and well, and Tom Petty argues hailing from Gainesville, Florida. But to have such a sort of fine, effortless debut album finish with its best song shows incredible confidence. And the song itself, with its infectious beat, catchy backing vocals, it's become an American radio classic, and of course was used to very darkly memorable effect in The Silence of the Lambs. I'm at number 9 from 1985. I'm going to put Brothers in Arms. This was the closing track to the blockbuster album of the same name. Brothers in Arms is an album that signalled a new era in digital music making, which was used to great effect all over this slightly cold but no less impressive 80s opus. What's so striking about this track is its humanity. Knopfler has always been one of the great guitar players, and his feel is absolutely brilliant. And here he uses his fingers to play, to add flesh and bones to his touch, and it's absolutely beautiful. And then you have this softly vulnerable lyric over the top, vocal over the top, the sparse arrangement and that affecting lyric. It's 7 minutes long, but it does build, but it doesn't build to too much of a big portentous climax. It builds very, very carefully and tastefully and subtly, but no less powerfully. And it became, I think, a blueprint to a lot of arena-sized rock bands on how to tug at the heartstrings and emotionally end your big statement album. And number 8, from 1972, I'm going to put Rock and Roll Suicide, the closing track on David Bowie's seminal classic, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. The album itself is, as you'll know, a concept about this alien rock and roll star Ziggy Stardust who lands on Earth and finds himself the subject of dangerous and adoring fan worship. I guess it's possibly slightly autobiographical, but this song, with its sparse acoustic guitar-led intro, it rounds off the album perfectly. It's dark and it's cynical. It has an element of the over-dramatic French Jacques Brel style that Bowie loved and he toyed with some songs and covers like Amsterdam. But from its opening line, Time Takes a Cigarette, to the closing refrain of Wonderful and You're Not Alone, it's effortlessly cool, and it's very, very David Bowie. And he, of course, retired Ziggy not too long after what was effectively in what was effectively his own rock and roll suicide. At number 7, from 1967, I'm going to put The End, appropriately titled final track from the Doors' debut album. And now, look, the Doors' debut album was unlike anything else on the scene at the time, most LA rockers were picking up acoustic guitars and learning how to sing melodic autobiographical love confessionals, inspired by Joni and Neil and James Taylor and countless others. The Doors were darker, they were scarier, they were a bit nastier. Certainly a lot nastier if you believe the late great David Crosby's Twitter feed. And never more so on this 12-minute opus that closed their album. It was originally just a shorter song about a breakup, but after months of gigs and improvisation of the song at the Fillmore, it evolved into much more of a performance piece. And there are even rumours that when the recording, Jim Morrison shot up during his vocal. The song encapsulates death, sex, Greek tragedy, Freud, the Oedipus complex. It's all rolled into one. It's perhaps now best remembered, I think, as the opening to Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, where it was used to devastating effect over scenes of American helicopters bombing the Vietnam countryside with napalm. That takes us to number 6. on that happy note, we go to number 6, which is Tomorrow Never Knows from 1966, the 1966 Beatles album Revolver. The Beatles were, of course, already on a road to reinvention when they made Revolver. They showed real experimental signs with Rubber Soul, but for many they truly emerged as the leaders of the new music with Revolver, where their use of mind-expanding drugs and the recording studio, it just gelled perfectly to create what many regard as their best album. And the masterpiece among an album of masterpieces is Tomorrow Never Knows. It starts with one of the most famous sampled and copied drum beats of them all, before a loop, a whirlwind loop of chanting Tibetan monks takes you into a new dimension entirely. And you've got this monotone chord droning over the top, broken up by a head-spinning array of sound effects. It really is the most perfect example of the Beatles at their most experimental. And of course, John Lennon's courage as a songwriter, but also their collective bravery as studio musicians, and the way they use the studio and what's available to create something new. It's easy to take these kind of things for granted now because the kind of studio experimentation is so commonplace. But to go back in time and have the courage to sort of break down these sonic barriers with all these ideas must have taken no small bravery, and probably quite a few drugs as well, I suspect. But what a great example of the band's collective genius. At number 5, from 1977, the song that rounds off one of the most perfect records of all, Rumours, it's Fleetwood Mac Gold Dust Woman. Now, Rumours, of course, regarded by many not only as Fleetwood Mac's best album, but as one of the most perfect albums of all time. And there's no doubt that top-notch quality is maintained all the way through this record, climaxing with this atmospheric, moody character study of a cocaine-addicted woman coming out of a relationship. Famously, Rumours is all about the unbelievable drama the band itself was going through at the time. You know, all the affairs and partner swapping and backstabbing, the arguments, the mountains of coke. It's a miracle this record ever got made, let alone is as brilliant as it is. And though it does veer off into a few fantastic individual tracks here and there, like Songbird and Never Going Back Again, it comes back in on itself and is rounded off with this fantastic collective effort, with these superb backing vocals, these wonderful subtle performances from the whole band. And in many ways, it's a perfect representation of Fleetwood Mac themselves, who managed one way or another to hold it all together and stay together for so long until December, when, of course, was it November or December? But until recently, when we very sadly lost the late, great Christine McVie. At number 4, we're into some real big hitters now, looking at what I've got ahead of me. So at number 4, from 1971, from The Who's magnum opus, Who's Next? It's Won't Get Fooled Again. Now, Who's Next is one of, if not The Who's best album, and it opens with the almighty Baba O'Reilly, with the sequencer dramatically and powerfully reeling you in before the drums thunderously set the beat. How on earth do you follow that? Well, you follow it by filling the album with a load of absolutely wonderful rock vignettes, but then you round it off with a similar trick but with completely different colours. So again, you have the sequencer, but it's a different sequencer set to a different kind of sound, a different melody playing. And live, it's absolutely breathtaking as that keyboard sound sweeps over you with the lasers overhead and everything before Pete Townsend crashes in with those opening chords. The song itself, it's bullish, it's aggressive, it's intelligent, and as a result of all that, it's very, very who are all of those things. And number 3, I'm going to put You Can't Always Get What You Want. The last track on the Rolling Stones' 1969 classic Let It Bleed. Let It Bleed is a brilliant, ramshackle, loose collection of fantastic music. And that it's rounded off by something so beautifully structured feels always to me slightly incongruous, but it works beautifully. Opening, of course, with the choir, and then the French horn comes in, then Keith's laconic acoustic guitar, and then I think one of Jagger's very best vocals over a very tasty Jimmy Miller drum groove. That's right, folks. Charlie, I'm afraid to say, didn't play on this one, as was fairly often the case in that middle period. Jimmy Miller playing drums here. And in fact, only Keith and Mick were the only other two Stones who played on this. Jagger sings of love, politics, drugs, 3 classic 60s topics, before dismissing them all with a kind of resigned pragmatism. Oh, well, you can't always get what you want. It's now one of the Stones' most popular and streamed songs, which, considering their vast catalogue, is pretty impressive. So it takes us to the top 2. I suspect you might be able to guess what these 2 are, but let's see. So number 2, I'm going to put Eclipse, which closes Pink Floyd's 1973 monumental record, Dark Side of the Moon. Actually, of course, this really works as a companion piece with Brain Damage, the song that just precedes it. The 2 have to really be taken as a pair. Dark Side of the Moon itself is one of the most beautifully crafted albums of all time, and when you have those sounds and structure like that production like that, you'd better have something pretty impressive to round it all off and bow out with. And it really does. The second side builds beautifully here. You through Money, Us and Them. Oh my God, what a song! Any Colour You Like before landing on Brain Damage with the recordings of people laughing and talking, the memorable refrain, "The lunatic is on the grass," and then into Eclipse has this repetitive melody that builds and builds, and then the song itself ends with this fading heartbeat, the same heartbeat that the album opens with, and you really, really do feel like you've been on some just magical musical journey when you listen to a record so beautifully paced and crafted and rounded off as Dark Side of the Moon. So that takes us to our number 1. Mine, because many of you are not going to agree with me, but I suspect many of you will agree with me. It's from 1967. It's from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's the Beatles again, and it's, of course, A Day in the Life. And look, let's be honest. You knew this would be number 1, and if you didn't, then what have you been watching for the last few years on Rock Records Reviewed? For me, really, this was number 1 in a field of one, I think. When I thought of this topic, this is the song that immediately came to mind and stayed there. Sgt. Pepper is an album that just still delights me, and it still surprises me, and it still intrigues me to this day. And I have literally heard this record thousands of times since I was a little fellow who fell in love with the Beatles as a tiny little lad. People... A lot of people dismiss it as overrated, but go back to it again with fresh ears if you can and spend some time with it. People sometimes say, if you could go back in history, where would you go? And I often think when I'm asked that, or when I think about it, that I'd love to... how amazing it would be to be a sort of 17-year-old kid living in London in 1967, hearing this album for the first time. It would be mind-blowing. And if you were there and did that, then let us know in the comments and tell us what you thought about it. I'd love to know. But it's a seminal album for many, many reasons, and one of them, of course, is A Day in the Life. Many of the lyrics, of course, taken from a story in a daily newspaper that John Lennon was reading, and they're strange and they're full of psychedelic imagery and wordplay, yet somehow, when mixed with McCartney's middle section, they become mundane, but in a powerful black and white kitchen sink drama sort of way. It's all incredibly English, as is the whole album, but it's the music here that really knocks it out of the park. You've got that beautiful acoustic guitar strummed intro, Ringo's flawless tom rolls, that piano and the joining of the Lennon and McCartney sections, which is just flawless, that perfect coming together of these two talents like that. And the whole thing, then the song sort of then races to the finish line with that famous orchestral climax, followed by the devastating piano chord that just stays and rings out for what feels like eternity. It's one of those songs that once you've heard it once, you never, ever forget. And it simply had to be number one on my list. But I would love to know what's number one on your list, because I know you're going to have a lot of different choices to me. I'm going to give a really honourable mention here to another Beatles closing track, but it's kind of it's Her Majesty from Abbey Road, which I kind of love, but it does. I have to say, if Her Majesty didn't finish Abbey Road and you finished with the medley, I would have no choice but to put the medley on there, because I'm sure many of you know how much I love that side of music and that little run of songs on side 2 of Abbey Road. But look, Her Majesty, it's cheeky, it's throwaway, it's kind of funny, it's very, very Beatles, so I forgive them for that. I forgive them. Get me forgiving the Beatles. So, look, like I said, that's my list. I'd love to hear yours. I think it's kind of a fun topic, and lots of songs that we all could have chosen. But that's it for now, and I will hope to see you very soon again for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thank you lot. Bye-bye.